Welcome to the Green Talk, where we spotlight the stories and challenge that shape industries and lives. I'm your host, Misrael Mata, and today's episode focuses on seasonal workers and the H2B visa program, a topic filled with legal challenge and a human impact. To help us to navigate this, we are joined by two brilliant lawyers who specialize in immigration and labor law. It is an honor to have them share their expertise with us. We welcome Nataly Mualem, H2B business and investor visa attorney at Mualem firm, and Meagan Kirchner, H2B and business immigration attorney at Kirchner's Law. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining the Green Talk. Let's start with the fundamentals. Nataly, can you explain us what the H2B visa program is?
Sure.
Basically.
Absolutely. So the H2B program is a program that was created to help employers fill seasonal gaps in their workforce. There's several different types of seasonal gaps. There's one that's a peak load need, which means that there's certain months of the year where the need is much higher than the rest. Then there's also the purely seasonal businesses, which are ones that have just certain months of the year where they do not have a need at all. So think of snow cleaners, for example. There's also a one-time occurrence and intermittent need, but those are in the minority for most companies. As long as you're able to prove that you're seasonal and that you've recruited and not been able to fill those positions with U.S. workers, the government allows you to bring in a foreign labor source.
Very good. Very good. Meagan, so now why this program, it is important for industries like landscaping, hospitality, and construction, and many others?
Right. So, the amount of labor available in the U.S. and a lot of these industries, they just have such a hard time filling the gaps. So for my landscapers and my construction, H2B, once they get into the program and they can start utilizing H2B workforce, this can be the catalyst that brings them from, struggling to, grow 1% in 1 year to, they suddenly in 1 year, they're up 20%. And this is the only mechanism that they can actually grow their contracts rather than just sustaining their existing business. So, being able to fill this labor need provides a filler for this gap that would allow them to go from just getting by to actually having tangible growth. And that's just, for your construction and landscaping. If you're looking at hospitality, it can be the difference between having your rooms be able to be turned over and not. A lot of my hospitality clients have been in areas where, the available rooms for booking, they have a large chunk they just can't turn over day to day. So there's not enough staff to get them clean before the next day for next check-in. So in these industries, it's the difference between succeeding and, just barely getting by. So it can really be a catalyst for change for a lot of businesses, small and large.
Right. Yeah. So it is need. It is a need in the industry. And it's just a question like kind of just pop in my mind while you were talking. So many people believe that we have that workforce in the country to fill those gaps, but the reality is that we do not, correct?
I mean, as far as the available willing to work in a lot of these areas, that's correct. A lot of these places are recruiting constantly, and it's a revolving door of either no workers or constant turnover. So it's not a matter of, jobs that just we're choosing not to fill with U.S. workers. They're constantly trying to fill them. And I'm a last resort. I wouldn't have clients want to pay me money for services if they were able to fill these jobs organically. Yeah. It's not so black and white as the media would have it seem.
Exactly. And Nataly, speaking on across the country, there is a specific zones where the need is the most, like there is up north, south, Midwest, there is a specific areas.
So I think it depends on the industries. We definitely have pockets of high need, and I've looked at the data to see which states are the most prevalent, but the more clear patterns I think are industry specific. So we can see the most common use is in landscaping, and then construction, obviously hospitality. But what's kind of interesting as well as there's actually new players entering the H2B arena. So I've noticed a lot of companies that wouldn't usually or historically have used H2Bs now start to use them. And it goes to show how outdated the data that's being used is, because we are limited to 66,000 visas, but yet, all these new industries are currently joining the H2B sphere to kind of tap into that source. And we notice that very prevalently, but definitely there are, depending on what industry you're in. So let's say we're talking hospitality, lots going to happen in Florida, some along the East Coast, a little bit in the Western states. But if we're talking about landscaping, it's really all over the country. If we're talking about construction, it's all over the country. But there's definitely, more prevalent areas depending on what it is. But the industry categories, I think, are more prevalent than the regional.
Right. And outside the ordinary industries, you mentioned that there is starting to see the need in other fields. Could you mention some samples of these industries that are not like in the normal?
Yeah. So
meatpacking is a huge one. Just since 2015, I just read articles on meatpacking the other day. There were a few thousand, and then the number of companies using it this year, it's substantially more. I don't know a lot of other industries that maybe were less traditional. I mean, I've had some, it wouldn't even be a full industry, but, pest removal or things like that where you're not really thinking of it being seasonal. That can be something that I've seen come up not infrequently recently. Maybe, Nataly, you have some more. I've had some more one-offs that aren't quite so broad, like some unique use cases, but meatpacking was the big one I was thinking of, like a industry-wide kind of.
Exactly. I was thinking of meatpacking as well, but I've also had nannies, adult home care workers. We've seen some H2Bs even for administrative workers. So kind of like admin staff in offices. I've seen that as well recently. And then, along with some of the other industries, I think they, kind of use H2B workers for filling the traditional positions. And then they say, maybe we need our bookkeepers as seasonal staff as well. And it's kind of growing that way as well within the same companies, but across less traditional roles.
Very, very interesting. This morning, I wrote an article about a shortage on the nursing industry, like in the hospitals and nursing cares, like assisted living. So it was new for me. But definitely there is a need, right? And this program could help. Well, all that sounds very straightforward, but I do imagine that there is challenge involved. So Meagan, what are some of the key legal challenges that employers and workers face in this process?
Well, I mean, the glaring issue is the cap, obviously. For a 4/1 start date, April 1st start date, it's 3 or 4-fold demand over what's supply that hasn't changed for 30 plus years, so it's very challenging for employers who are true to their start date to actually be able to even participate. If there are players that get left out of the game that can't justify an April 1st or an October 1st start date, and if they can't overcome that initial hurdle just with their season, they're going to be kind of left out of the program, even though they would otherwise be able to prove the need. So the cap in and of itself is just a tremendous barrier to entry. The administrative burden on employers can be cumbersome for a lot of employers, especially small employers. So getting compliant, making sure they're able to have real payroll records, provide pay statements for all the employees, make sure they're following all the wage requirements for the H2B program, for their H2B as well as their corresponding U.S. employees. That can be a challenge to employers who have a large workforce. Just the way the wages have changed year to year. I'm sure Nataly, I saw this as well, but last year, normally for our wage requirements, they go up a few cents plus or minus every year. I had a lot of employers last year that went up $1 or more over the last season. That challenge is a legal requirement for the program, is that they have to pay this wage. And so, we want everyone to be paying proper wages and be making fair wages. But when there's that much of a jump year to year, it's a little jolting for all employers. We could go through the entire, I don't know how far deep into the weeds we want to get into the legal challenges if we're going to get into compliance. A lot of things employers are going to need to have to do to make sure they're not disadvantaging U.S. workers, but also being fair and compliant with the foreign workers. So those are the, we could get into the hour requirements, contract requirements, those are things that employers are absolutely going to have to be beholden to, so just to make sure it's a good fit. I allot 30 minutes for an intake, and it always takes me an hour.
Right.
Just trying to go over make sure there's no surprises for the employers. So, there's a lot of things that need to be considered in addition to, their local labor laws. So I could do an hour just on compliance and legal challenges for employers.
Absolutely. Nataly, do you have anything to add? Any other comments on the challenge the employers face?
I think Meagan really covered most of it, but I would say the only other thing in my mind is the Department of Labor has not been consistent. So we definitely sometimes have cases with very similar fact patterns that end up in with different outcomes just because the Department of Labor is not consistent and there isn't a lot of guidance on the H2B program. So it's a little bit, also unforeseeable sometimes of how the case will turn out. Because you'll tell the client, this is how it should go because we've had, this number of cases that follow the same fact pattern, and then you'll have an odd one out. And, I think the fortunate part is that we've been able to successfully refile or to answer questions on a notice of deficiency and been able to overcome those challenges. But it's a little bit jarring as well when you have a very left field response and the Department of Labor does choose a different topic. It seems like to really hone in on every season. So we're always, looking to see what's coming next and what's going to be the focus of enforcement next.
Yeah. And that has challenges because then that messes up your timelines and then they might miss something for something you couldn't predict.
It's a lot to think, right? I mean, it's a lot on that process. And I will say that this brings us to kind of the human side of the story. So these individuals that are coming from Mexico, some other countries to work in the U.S. under this program, they have to face also challenge either when they're working here and when they have to go back to their countries. And Nataly, do you have any ideas of these issues or challenge that the workers now have to face?
Absolutely. So we try to keep very close contact with the workers throughout the season. And we get to hear from them the firsthand. I mean, anybody that's traveling to a different country to the unknown obviously has, that challenge of what's happening next. How am I going to be treated? All the basic things that come with just leaving your home, whether that's across the state or across the country or just being somewhere different, regardless of the reason. But I think with H2Bs, there is an expectation for how much they're going to be able to work and the output that they have. And sometimes those expectations can be unrealistic. Sometimes we've had, unfortunately, employers that maybe don't view the H2B workers as kindly as they should. I think that's in the minority. 99.9% of the people that we've interacted with have been really grateful for the opportunity and really happy to be under the H2B program, but you definitely have those outliers as well. And I think one of the biggest challenges is not knowing what happens next. Like, it's hard to build a career as an H2B worker because, your employer that maybe you really enjoy working with and they really enjoy you, or having you as an employee, maybe next season they're out of the cap and then you're kind of left searching all over again. So it's really hard to rely on that as a career or to really build long-lasting relationships because of the limitations of the cap. And I think Meagan hit on this, but the cap is completely unrealistic because, it was established in the 1990s. Think about all the new jobs and careers that have emerged since then. So the young people in the United States have opportunities that didn't exist then. And we're still limiting it to what America looks like in the 1990s, which is a completely different place. So they have that challenge of, do I have the opportunity to come back? Who do I come back working for? What's going to happen to the petition? So all of those, I think, we hear that a lot from workers that want some continuity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Meagan, seems like you have something to say.
I'm just the challenges and the number of times where a worker is upset because they want to come back and then they find out, I've been coming to this employer for 5 years. I don't want to work for anybody else. Do I disadvantage my family and not come over all this year? Or do I try roll the dice and see if I get a good employer this time? Cause it's a lot different than if I wanted to go get a job here and the employer doesn't pan out, I just go find another job. These guys' visas are tied to their employer. So if they have an employer they don't like, they either have to choose to stick it out for the season if they come, or they can try and find another employer and transfer. But that's just the logistics of that for someone who doesn't speak, it's not their native language, trying to navigate that. Maybe they don't have access to technology to find another job and get a transfer. There's just inherent challenges in that for the workers. And unlike H2A, these guys are also subject to withholding and taxes. So they are paying into the system, and do they know how to file for their taxes to get a refund? Probably not. Some of it with a good HR, I'll say, hey, can they do this? Can they file for their taxes? And it's sure. And if they want to help them do it, or if they give them resources to do it, that's great. And they do. But just the number of people that I probably go without doing that. And so the money is just gone for them. I mean, that's not necessarily fair, but
right.
That's a challenge for a worker. Whistleblowing in the past has been an issue. That was something that came out recently, is more whistleblower protections for H2 workers. That came out in the modernization rule in January. We'll see how that helps workers, but that's something, that they are trying to improve on so that they have more stability and protection.
Right. So when an employer, fill an application to request, workers from the country, there isn't a specific time, like the worker has to be in the U.S. working for him. Who decides that? It's just a question that pops up in my mind. For how long the employee is going to be in the U.S. working? Right.
So if they're going with a particular employer, their visa is going to be good for the period of the employer. So the employer's season. So whatever season the employer has, that they're either have a peak or that's only the season being the months that they work. That's the validity period for the worker's visa for that year. Now the worker, before the expiration of that, they can find another employer stateside and transfer and do an extension and change of employer. They can do that so that they don't have to travel back to their home country between employers. Some employees will do that. They'll find contract to contract, and they can do that for up to 3 years before they need to reset that clock. So some workers, they're away from their family for 9 or 10 months. They want to go home and have a few months off before they come back. So that's really an individual determination for each worker on whether they want to keep doing the dance and go work or, transfer between employers, or if they want to go home for a little bit.
Okay. Fair enough. Absolutely. So now, since we're talking about the employers, now they are in the program, they have the employees in the country with them working. Nataly, what could be some of the challenges that the employers face when they're participating in the program with employees now in the country?
I think the biggest challenge is probably language for most companies. We see that a lot where, communication is different, culture is different, and now you have to bridge that gap. The other part of the piece is obviously the compliance. So your compliance piece does not end once the worker comes here. There's definitely a lot that you have to do to ensure that you remain compliant. And it's definitely added work on the plate of the employer. Most of the times we hear that it's worth it and the benefit that they're getting out of it definitely outweighs that risk, but you have, now you're part of a government system, and anytime you're kind of enrolled in any sort of government program, whether that's visas or assistance programs or loan programs, whatever it is, there's a compliance portion that comes to that. So you're dealing with the logistics day to day with things like language and culture, but you're also dealing with, making sure that your records are accurate, that your practices are all what you agree to when you sign the different attestations, when you receive the workers. And I think there's also that challenge of, now our business is doing well. We have our workers secured for this season. We're able to grow. Are we going to be able to replicate that next year? So that's definitely, difficult to, once you scale up, of maintaining that. And I recently was asked by somebody, they had heard, and I thought the way that they phrased it was interesting, but they said H2B is like a drug that, once you get to it, it's hard to come off because you have, good, reliable workforce, everything's going well, but what happens if your supply is suddenly cut off? And, I don't say this to dissuade anybody from using H2B, definitely. But,
yeah.
The idea is, you have to have a strategic plan that includes all the possibilities. And a lot of times that just means we work together to ensure that your chances of getting the workers are higher the next year. But definitely have a backup plan and a contingency plan and, think ahead and always apply earlier than you need so you're not left in the lurch like that, because it really is difficult to scale down once you've scaled up.
Right.
Right, definitely. Meagan, do you have anything to add? Any other challenges that you may think?
As long as, they're remaining in compliance is the hardest thing. It's just making sure, they're tracking all of the workers. They're not treating anybody differently. Everybody is being treated fairly, U.S. and foreign, and just making sure they're following all of the record keeping. And so, that's a challenge. That is a tremendous challenge for especially small employers that don't have their own admins. I've got quite a few small landscapers that they're still working in the field with the guys, right? So
yeah,
they have a part-time admin or no admin. So making sure they are able to remain in compliance is a big thing for me, is trying to, depending on the size of the employer, there's a different finesse needed. The more hand-holding, less hand-holding, more reminders, right? Just depending on the size of the company, the burden of that can be more challenging for some than others. Her point regarding, the scale, that the number of times I have to have a hard conversation with someone because, they're used to having the same 10 guys and they don't want anybody else. And like, well, I can't strategize if you don't have, that's the only option you want. It's hard.
It's hard.
Option. And other than try those years, they've just got to double down on U.S. recruitment. And more than likely what happens in most of those years, they either lose contracts or they have their existing staff working triple time. It's a hard year, those years.
I understand. Let's talk about a company, let's say a landscaping company is thinking on starting participating on this program. How someone like Meagan or Nataly can help this company in this process. Nataly?
Sure. So
what's the first step?
So I think the first step is a long conversation anytime. We really try to talk with the companies and figure out their pain points, figure out where the issue is. Is it, is it a leaky bucket, or is it, actually just there's no available workers near them? And most of the time, if they're coming to us, like Meagan said, it's a last resort. Nobody wakes up and thinks, I want to pay an immigration attorney today. So usually they're coming to us with that. So we sit down, we evaluate their seasonality. We evaluate, their ability to prove the number of workers, do a quick assessment on their records that are available, talk about how does your payroll look like? How does your annual revenue report look like? How do your contracts look like for the upcoming year? Are you a type of company that signs on all the work initially and then, has it planned out for the year? Or are you kind of go as work as you go sort of company? So we talk about all those things to assess, first of all, are they eligible and can we likely meet that need? And show that need, and meet the burden for the application. If they can, then the next step comes, let's talk about compliance. These are all the things that you're going to have to do if you go on this journey with us to obtain H2B workers. And here are some of the logistics of it. And then we talk about some of the strategies behind it. So we talk about, maybe shifting your workforce needs, or maybe we divide or differentiate some of the jobs. Maybe one of them is very seasonal while the other ones aren't. We talk about maybe doing staggered applications or multiple applications. Just really depends on the company and what options they are willing to go with, just to kind of ensure that it's not just a shot in the dark, which is what sometimes it feels like, especially in the April filing. It does sometimes feel like, just really shot in the dark there. But I think there's definitely safeguards that we can talk about and see what they're willing to do. And like Meagan said, if they're open to other countries or other places or other sources of labor, one of the things we do sometimes is we set up companies together. So maybe your workers are exempt and you don't need them anymore. So we'll transfer them to us. And we work on those types of strategies. And then we talk about, obviously, the cost of the program and if it's something feasible for the company. I think what either one of us can do is actually help the company avoid getting into a pattern of denials with the DOL, because it is hard to overcome, and we've seen it happen, especially when somebody's not represented or they're not represented by an attorney. The other thing that we can probably help with is, helping them find reasonable recruiters as well, like recruiters that are trustworthy. because that's a big major part of the process as well. But I'm sure Meagan has some things to add there too.
Yeah, all right. That's all right. Yeah, that's all definitely on point. It's tough to come up with a fire plan, but we can try and come up with backup plans, alternatives, thinking outside the box. Those things can be helpful. And I have had plenty of applications come to me that are, like you said, they filed it themselves 1 or 2 times or 3 times even I've seen before. And they're all different and they're all trying to answer whatever was wrong with it before. And then finally I get it. I'm like, okay, we're going to try and do it right this time. Please explain what happened these other times and we can try and get it right on, get it on track. We'll still probably won't get workers this year, but at least you're going to get certified. So next year, a good record, and we can file for your true season, because when there's an issue like that, when you hit a snag in this process and it takes them 2, 3, 4 weeks to review the notice of sufficiency, like to correct any error, by that time, the cap's probably met. It's October or April. So that is what value we can add is preventing. We may not be able to guarantee workers every year because of the cap, but we can submit a good application where there's none of those or fewer of those outlier issues. Because again, like she said earlier on, we can submit a perfect application that's 2 of them are identical. One of them has a question, one of them doesn't. Not necessarily transparency and consistency, but we can give you more than you would, significantly more than you would have filing on your own.
Right. So what's the best time frame for a company to start this process? Like in the best case scenario, I know there is depending on size of the company and so many things, but in your experience, what's the best time frame for a company to start this process?
Be interested. I don't know if we have the same answer, but I try and start my October 1st filings and I try to send out contracts in February and work on them in March and make sure wages are filed no later than April for anybody. You can't file them too early for October because the prevailing wage, you run the risk of it expiring, but toe that line and try and get them submitted as early as possible. Sweet spot being like March, starting that for me. And then if we're looking at April 1st, I send out contracts in June, July and file wages in July as soon as that wage data turns over. For the next season, right? So I'm now for this fall, starting October, and then in June or July this year, I'll start the spring next year, spring 26 files.
26, right. Nataly, you do something different?
My timelines are, I guess, a little tighter. So we accept applications for the October filing up until the end of May. So, yes, the end of May, but knowing that most of the time they do take 6 weeks for the prevailing wages. So with those, those clients, we kind of tell them it's on a rolling basis. Some years it's no problem at all. Other years it could, mean that they're capped out. But usually we say middle of May, you should be okay. And then for the spring filings, it's a lot more time sensitive. So for spring filings, we try to file those in October. Most of my clients, it looks like Meagan has some unicorn clients that are ready to commit much earlier. But a lot of my clients want to get their workers in, especially if it's their first or second year filing. They want to get them in. They want to, see how it feels and meet the workers before they sign up for the next season. Some of my more veteran clients are willing to adhere to that and go by the earlier deadlines. And we already have quite a few filed for fall already. But when it comes to the new clients, they usually want to make sure that, they've experienced the H2B program before they're signing off for the next season.
All right.
That's a really good point. I do have new clients that will be last minute stragglers and I will tell them I'll file it, but I can't make any guarantees when we get that close. I had one file, I think, like the first week in November last year and it barely made it in.
That's good. And how many visas total the government give up in a season or in a year? You know that or no? You have that number? It's limited number?
Yeah, the baseline cap is the same every year. It's 66,000 and there's a supplemental cap that it's a different flavor every year. In the past few years, it's been the same. Past few years, there's been 64,000 and change for the total year. And they've divided it, portion being fall returning workers, the portion being spring returning workers, and the portion being country specific is what we call it this year. We used to call it Northern Triangle. There's a set of countries that don't have the same eligibility requirements as returning workers. That's what it's looked like in the past few years. It's really anybody's guess on what it's going to look like next year. There's some things we're hoping for status quo, but that'll be kind of best case scenario. If that's great, we're just hoping for an up first.
then obviously those numbers are not enough, right?
No, even
We
with
need
those,
more.
not enough.
Not enough. So it seems like employers, employees, and immigration lawyers like you all, it is a huge thing going on, issues, challenge, system is broke. We all know that. In your experience and for the things that you may know better than anyone else, do you ladies see something in the horizon that could change a policy or something that can improve the system, and specifically on this program or any other program that affects the labor?
And if
Meagan, you want to go first? Or Nataly, you want to go first?
Before, you're welcome to go first. I have things.
Okay.
I think
Here's your time now.
we probably both have hundreds of suggestions of what should happen or, you know, what would be best case scenario or what we think should happen. But I think being realistic, there's definitely more raids going on. There's more emphasis on eliminating workers that are not documented. So this really is going to become the only alternative. And I think with more and more companies realizing that, and I've seen it in my own practice, I've been getting more calls than ever of, you know, we've basically had undocumented workers for the X amount of years. Now we want to do something. We're afraid, our workers are afraid they're not showing up to work. What can we do? So I do think that H2B is going to be more sought after in the next couple of years. Whether that translates to more visas or not is really up in the air. There's been a supplemental cap allocation that was supposed to already go into effect and it hasn't. So we don't really know what's happening. The cap likely was met sometime, March 6th or that week, of March 6th. And we still not have received notification that it's been met. So the supplemental visas, which were tied to the cap being met, have not been released. So basically the way it worked was they said whenever the cap was met, 15 days later, you can access this like store of extra visas. We have not been able to do that. So that's not been a good sign. But in the previous administration under Trump, we did have supplemental caps. They were not as expansive as the last couple of years, but they did exist. So, you know, it's hard to guess what the current administration will do with H2Bs. Is it going to be seen as, you know, an alternative for these business owners, or is it going to be limited to the 66,000, which would leave a lot of employers in the lurch, especially those that joined in the last few years, and it was only made possible because of the supplemental cap.
Meagan?
No, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. That the past few years, you know, supplementals have been critical. The current flavor of supplementals was actually started under this version 1 of this administration. So I was hopeful that there would be, like I said, status quo. You know, hopefully they would at least keep doing what they've been doing. You know, with this delay, it's kind of a little concerning and nerve-wracking. I follow some very important H2 lobbyists in the area, in the field, and they're adamant the cap was met in early March. The 5th is what I've been told, and so that means the supplemental visas should have opened up last Friday, and we should already be filing supplementals. I've already got mine ready to go. All the forms are signed. I'm just waiting for the go to send them, and so we're just kind of in limbo right now. I've heard a few proposals for how to fix this instead of supplementals that have been trying to go through Congress. You know, different. You know, 10 years ago, 2012 to 2016, there was a returning worker exemption. That was a nice fix, because that means, like, kind of like the returning worker supplementals, there were workers that were exempt as they were returning. For a period of 3 years, they could not have to re-enter the cap, right? So a lot of employers that were regular participants in the program, that was a great pressure release valve. There wasn't this separate attestation for the supplementals. There wasn't a cap on it. It was just there. And that was a great version. I would love to see that come back. Another version that they've been floating in Congress has been similar, but it's based on the employer. So the employer, if they've been certified for a certain number of years, then the employer, if that whatever number they have on their certified registration, on their registration for that year, that number of workers is going to be cap exempt for a period of years before they have to re-enter the cap. If they want to expand that, they'll have to re-enter the cap for the number of workers over that. In any version that would be better. It would be fantastic. Whether that's, again, going to pass muster and make it through all the legislative steps that it needs to be useful, anybody's guess. There's lots of great ideas that are possible. They just need a huge push from the constituents. I've been encouraging my employers to reach out to their representatives to hey, at least get these released. You've already told us they're coming. We're relying on them, and just keep that pressure on. And then we'll get through this season and hope for something better next season, or like I said, at least the same. That's what we're hoping.
It's always hope in the future, in the horizon. Right. Well, thank you both for sharing your expertise in this critical issue. There is no question that the H2B visa program touches so many lives, and understanding the challenge and opportunities is the first step to create a better system for everyone involved, including you all, because you put a lot of work on this, filling all this paperwork and following up and everything. So thank you for joining the Green Talk. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. And hopefully soon we can be talking about a new policy and a better future for all, and talking about the new regulations and everything else.
That would be fantastic. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I will see you guys or girls the next time, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.